She had 3 things sewn into the lining of her coat, $13, 5 cartridges, and the false name her husband planned to sell her under. But none of those were the thing that saved Maren Vale. What saved her came first in a mercantile on a frozen Thursday morning, when a stranger with snow on his shoulders looked at the richest man in Grayfork, Wyoming, and said, "Take your hand off her sleeve." For 4 years, Maren Vale had lived in a house that sat above the town like a judge. From the road, the Hale place looked handsome. 2 stories of milled timber, tall windows, a glassed-in porch, lanterns bright enough to be seen from the far end of the valley. Inside, it was quieter than any grave had a right to be. Benedict Hale liked quiet. He liked ledgers balanced, servants obedient, horses brushed, floors polished, and his wife moving through rooms as if she had been trained by the furniture. Grayfork knew. The banker knew. The preacher knew. The deputy knew. Even the women who lowered their eyes in the mercantile knew. Because bruises in a town that small did not stay private. They only became everybody's excuse to look somewhere else. Benedict owned the freight contracts, the winter feed, the mine road, and 2/3 of the men who called themselves independent. So when Maren came into Elias Bell's mercantile that morning with a blue shadow under her left cheekbone and a shopping list in her gloved hand, nobody asked her what had happened. That was the rule in Grayfork. You saw. You understood. You said nothing. The store smelled of lamp oil, coffee beans, damp wool, and the kind of cold that rides into a room on people's boots. Maren stood beside a barrel of flour, reading the list written in Benedict's fine square hand. 2 pounds coffee, needles, salt, lamp oil, black ribbon. Black ribbon was not for sewing, not really. It was the code Benedict used when he wanted her brought to town and watched. A spool of black ribbon meant she had become too quiet at home, too careful with her answers, too much like a woman measuring the distance to the door. Old Elias Bell watched her from behind the counter, polishing the same tin scoop for the 3rd time. "You need help with that sack, Mrs. Hale?" "I can carry it." She said it softly, because soft answers left fewer marks. The bell over the door gave a dull little cry. Maren did not turn. She knew the sound of Benedict entering any room. Not because his boots were loud. They were not. Benedict never stomped. He arrived with the calm of a man certain the air would make room for him. Maren, his public voice, warm on the surface, clean as polished bone. She turned. Benedict Hale was 44, broad-shouldered, shaved close, dressed better than any man in a winter cattle town had practical need to dress. His gray coat was brushed. His gloves were new. His hat brim was dark with melting snow. His eyes went to her basket, then the list, then her face. "You forgot the ribbon. I was getting coffee first." "No," he said with a small, patient smile. "You were drifting." Nobody moved. Elias Bell looked down at the scoop. 2 miners by the stove became fascinated with their boots. A woman at the fabric counter folded the same square of muslin over and over until her hands started to shake. Benedict crossed the floor and took the list from Maren's fingers. Not roughly. Never roughly in public. That was one of his gifts. "You also opened the rosewood box," he said. Maren felt the room narrow. "I dusted your study. You opened the box. I did not take anything." Benedict's smile did not change, but something behind it hardened. There were $15 in gold certificates. Now there are 13. $2. She had taken $2 from a box that held 15, because $2 could vanish if a man was not counting like a jailer. But Benedict counted everything. He counted coins. He counted footsteps. He counted how long she took in town. He counted how many people looked at her, and how many seconds they looked. He reached for her sleeve and closed his fingers just above her wrist. The grip was gentle enough to leave no mark, exact enough to tell her what was coming later. "We will discuss this at home." Maren lowered her eyes. That was another rule. Make yourself smaller before the room demanded it. Benedict turned her toward the door. They had taken 3 steps when a man beside the stove said, "Let go of her sleeve." Every person in the mercantile looked up. The stranger stood half in shadow near the nail bins, a sack of coffee at his boots, a fur collar dark with snow melt. He was tall, but not in the proud way. More like a pine tree that had never asked permission to grow where it grew. His face was weathered brown from wind and sun. His beard was trimmed with a knife, not a mirror. His hands hung empty at his sides, and he was looking at Benedict Hale without the town's practiced fear. Benedict turned his head slowly. "I don't believe we have met." "No," the stranger said, "then you may not understand where you are." "I understand enough." The store went so still Maren could hear the stove breathe. Benedict gave a small laugh. "You are one of the ridge men." The stranger did not answer. "Trapper? Guide? Some kind of winter scavenger?" "Depends who's asking." "I am asking, then no." The miners by the stove stopped breathing in unison. Benedict's fingers tightened on Maren's sleeve. The stranger's eyes moved to that hand, not to Benedict's face, not to the gun under Benedict's coat, to the hand. "That is the last time I'll say it." Benedict released Maren, not because he had obeyed, because he wanted his right hand free. He moved fast. Maren knew the shift of his shoulder before violence. She had learned it the way a farmer learns weather, but the stranger moved as if he had already seen the motion happen. He caught Benedict's wrist in midair and stepped in close. There was no dramatic struggle, no shouting, just Benedict Hale's mouth opening around a sharp, involuntary sound. The stranger held him there. "You will walk out," he said, low enough that the whole room leaned toward it. "You will take your hand with you, and everybody in this store gets to keep the rest of their day." Benedict's face drained white along the jaw. "You have no idea what you have done, maybe." The stranger's grip did not move. "Say you understand." Benedict stared at him. The grip tightened by a fraction. Benedict said, "I understand." The stranger let go. For a second, Benedict looked like a man who had stepped into a hole he had not seen in the road. Then he rebuilt himself, button by button, breath by breath, hat in hand. "Ice cold Maren," he said. Outside, she went. She did not look at the stranger. She could not afford to look grateful. But as she passed Elias Bell, the old storekeeper whispered something so softly it seemed meant for the floorboards. "Lord help us," he said. Somebody finally said it. The ride home was 5 miles through hard snow and harder silence. Benedict rode ahead. Maren followed on the dun mare, eyes fixed on his back, ribs aching under her coat. The Hale house stood on a rise above the South Fork, all bright windows and black spruce. When they reached the yard, Benedict dismounted and handed his reins to the stable boy. He did not speak to Maren. That was worse than speaking. Inside, Lottie Merck was waiting in the hall. Lottie was Benedict's cousin by marriage, his housekeeper by title, and his second conscience by practice. She wore her gray hair pinned too tightly and carried keys at her waist like a church bell that never rang for mercy. "You are late," she said. Benedict removed his gloves. "We had a disturbance." Lottie's eyes moved to Maren. "Of course you did." That night dinner was roast venison, boiled onions, and Benedict's silence. Maren ate because hunger made fear worse. After the plates were cleared, Benedict sent Lottie upstairs. Then he called Maren into the study. The study was Benedict's true room. Maps on the wall, mine surveys, freight contracts, a locked rosewood box, a painted portrait of his father, who had been dead 12 years and still somehow governed the house. Benedict stood by the desk. "You humiliated me." Maren looked at the carpet. I did not speak. That was the humiliation. He came around the desk. "You stood there and let a mountain vagrant put hands on me." I did not know him. No. But he knew something, didn't he? Or he thought he did. I have never seen him before. Benedict tilted his head. There was a version of him that looked almost wounded in moments like this. In the first year, she had mistaken that look for pain. By the second year, she understood it was only anger dressed for church. "His name is Elias Ward," Benedict said. Maren looked up before she could stop herself. He smiled. "There, now you have seen him before. I only reacted because you knew his name. Do not explain my wife to me." The blow came so fast the lamp flame jumped before she felt the floor. She lay against the desk leg, tasting blood where she had bitten the inside of her cheek. Benedict crouched beside her. "That man will learn what it costs to interfere with me, but you will learn first." What followed lasted long enough for the fire to settle into coals. When it ended, Benedict went upstairs. Maren stayed on the study floor until she could breathe without making a sound. Then she crawled to the wastebasket beside his desk, because when he had pulled a paper from his coat earlier, a torn corner had fallen. She did not know why she wanted it. Maybe because people like Benedict always left proof somewhere, believing proof did not matter when power stood over it. The paper scrap was small. 3 words remained: Bitter Gulch Transfer, and beneath them, in another hand, Imvale, not Vale, Vale. A false spelling for a woman being moved without wanting to be found. By morning, Maren understood enough. Benedict was not only going to punish her, he was going to dispose of her. She learned the rest 2 nights later through a heating grate in the back hall while Benedict and Lottie spoke in the study below. "She will be delivered before the thaw," Lottie said. "Pruitt wants her by the 20th. The railroad camp will take anything that looks respectable enough to ruin." Benedict's voice answered, flat and practical. "Then she goes as Margaret Vale, widow, no kin, no questions." Maren stood barefoot in the hall with her hand pressed over her mouth. The fear that came then was not sharp. It was enormous and quiet. The kind of fear that does not scream because it is too busy rearranging the world. She waited until the house slept. She went to the pantry first, because panic wastes movement and movement had to be counted. $13 from the coat lining. 5 cartridges from the flour tin where she had hidden them one at a time. Her father's old pocket compass from beneath a loose stair tread, and from Benedict's desk drawer, the small Colt he kept loaded for wolves, and men he considered similar. Then she took the black ribbon, not because she needed it, because she hated that he had made a warning out of something so small. She tied it around her wrist under her glove, where only she would know it was there. At the back door, she stopped. The storm outside had been building all evening. Snow clawed at the windows. The yard beyond the porch was a moving wall of white. Behind her was a warm house that wanted to kill her slowly. In front of her was weather that might kill her quickly. Maren opened the door. The cold entered like an animal. She stepped into it anyway. She took the dun mare from the south stall, because the better horses were kept near Benedict's window. Her hands shook on the girth strap. She had to buckle it twice. No lamp moved in the house. No voice called her name. She rode north, not toward Grayfork. Grayfork belonged to Benedict. She rode toward the ridge. toward the country where people said Elias Ward kept a cabin somewhere above the timberline and came down only when he needed salt, coffee, and news he did not trust. The first mile was blind. The second was worse. By the third, the road disappeared under drifted snow, and the mare began choosing her own path. Maren let her. A person can be too afraid to trust anything but a horse. The mare slipped at the creek crossing, not badly at first. Then a hoof punched through iced-over slush. The mare lurched, and Maren went over the shoulder into the dark. The world became white, black, and pain. Her ribs lit up like broken glass. The mare scrambled free and vanished into the storm with one brief, terrified snort. Maren tried to stand, fell. Tried again, stood. The compass in her pocket had cracked. The needle trembled without making a promise. She walked. There was no bravery in it, only subtraction. One more step, one more breath, one more tree. The cold stopped hurting after a while, which her father had once told her was when cold became most dangerous. She remembered his voice. When winter starts feeling kind, girl, it has already put its hand in your pocket. She laughed once at that, a small broken sound. Then she found a split cedar leaning over a rock shelf and crawled beneath the boughs where the wind was less. She meant to rest for 1 minute, only one. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, there was firelight on the ceiling. A rough log ceiling, blankets over her, smoke and pine pitch in the air, her boots off, her feet wrapped in strips of wool. A man sat near the hearth, sharpening a skinning knife with slow, careful strokes. Not Benedict. Elias Ward. He did not look at her right away. "You were blue when I found you," he said. "Don't sit up fast." She tried anyway. The ribs made their objection clear. He set the knife aside. "Broken? Cracked," she whispered. "Before tonight." He nodded once. No pity, no performance, just the small acknowledgement of a fact entering the room. "Where am I?" "Ridge cabin, above Cedar Draw." "How did you find me?" "Horse came through without a rider." "The mare?" "In the lean-to. Mean as a tax collector, but alive." Maren closed her eyes. Her gratitude came so suddenly it hurt more than the ribs. He handed her a tin cup. "Broth, small sips." She drank. The warmth went down like a rope. For a while, neither of them spoke. The cabin was one room, low-roofed and practical. Furs on the walls for insulation, not decoration. Snowshoes by the door, a rifle above the mantel, coils of rope, a table with 2 chairs, a shelf of tins and coffee and dried apples. It did not look safe. It looked used. That was better. "What is your name?" he asked. She watched the fire. "Maren Vale." Then, after a moment, "Not Hale." Elias leaned back in his chair. "All right." She slept most of the next day. When she woke properly, the storm had softened into steady snow. Elias was outside splitting wood, each axe fall measured and unhurried. Maren lay still and listened. For 4 years, a man's movement in the next room had meant calculation. What mood, what sound, what danger? Here, the axe was only an axe. The door opened. Elias came in with an armload of split pine and kicked snow from his boots. "You're awake? You knew?" Breathing changed. He stacked the wood, then put more broth on the stove. "I need to leave before he comes." "No, you don't know him. I know enough. He owns the deputy, the mine guards, the freight men, half the store accounts. If he thinks I came here, he'll come. Then he'll come uphill." Elias said it the way another man might say, "It may rain." Maren looked at him. "You are not frightened of him. I'm frightened of plenty, but not him." Elias stirred the pot. Men like Hale bring their country with them. Money, witnesses, frightened friends, signed papers, that sort of thing. He looked toward the window where the ridge disappeared in white. Up here he has to bring his lungs. She almost smiled. It hurt, so she stopped. That night she told him the rest. Not all of it. No one tells all of anything at once, but enough. The rosewood box, the stolen dollars, the paper scrap, Bitter Gulch, the false name. Lottie's voice through the grate. Elias listened without interrupting. That was the first thing. The second thing was that he did not ask why she waited so long. People who had never been trapped were always interested in the timing of escape, as if there were a proper hour for it. When she finished, he said, "Pruitt, you know him? I know the name, freight broker, moves whiskey men, sometimes worse." Maren looked at her hands. He was going to put me somewhere nobody would look for Maren Vale because nobody would know Maren Vale had arrived. Elias's jaw shifted once, then stilled. "That paper. You still have it?" "In my coat." He found the scrap in the inner seam and set it on the table beside her $13. The scrap looked smaller in daylight. Proof often does. "This won't stop him," she said. "No. Then why keep it?" "Because someday, when a man tells the world a clean story, it helps to have one dirty corner of the page." On the third day, Maren stood. Badly, but she stood. On the fourth, she walked to the door and looked out at the ridge. The world beyond the cabin had been remade in white and blue shadow. Below, the valley lay hidden. Above, a knife-edged line of rock cut the sky. "What is up there?" she asked. "Sentinel Notch. Trail drops on the far side toward Crowwater." "Is Crowwater in Hales County?" "No." "How far?" 40 miles if the weather stays decent. 60 if it doesn't." She looked at him. "Everything's 40 miles from a man like Benedict." "Not everything." The fifth morning she found the first riders. 4 dark marks moving between the trees below the cabin. No 5. She did not call for Elias loudly. She simply said his name. He came to the window and looked. Benedict rode in front on his black gelding. Behind him were 2 mine guards, Deputy Rusk with his badge dull against his coat, and Lottie Merck riding Sid's saddle like judgment itself. Maren felt her body begin the old work. Shoulders tight, breath shallow, mind splitting into roots and punishments. Elias took the rifle from above the mantle. They followed the mare's drag marks before the snow filled them in. "I brought them here." "No." He checked the rifle. "He chose to come." "What do we do?" He looked at the slope above the cabin. "There's a shelf trail past Sentinel Notch. Narrow place. Wind packs snow over empty air along the left edge. Locals know to keep right. And he won't. He will if someone tells him." Maren stared at him. "You're going to tell him wrong?" "I'm going to tell him the truth." He pulled on his coat. "He won't listen." That was how Benedict Hale lost the country he thought he owned. Not through a gunfight. Not through some grand confession in the street. Through terrain. Through wind. Through one narrow ledge where money could not widen the trail. Elias stepped outside and moved uphill through the trees. Maren barred the door. She loaded the Colt with 5 cartridges, her hands calmer than she felt. From the window she watched Benedict reach the clearing below the cabin. He looked up at the smoke from the chimney, then higher, toward the moving shape of Elias among the trees. Benedict shouted something she could not hear. Elias did not answer. Benedict turned to Deputy Rusk. The deputy shook his head. Lottie leaned toward Benedict and pointed uphill. Maren knew that gesture. Lottie never struck a match herself when she could persuade someone else to burn. The party climbed, slowly at first, then faster as the trees thinned and the trail squeezed toward the notch. For a long time there was only wind. Then, above the cabin, a crack rolled through the mountain. A sound like a table split in half by God. Men shouted. A horse screamed. A shot rang once, then another. Then silence came down heavier than the snow. Maren stood at the door with the colt in both hands. 27 minutes later, Elias returned, leading Benedict's black gelding by the reins. The horse was trembling but unhurt. Elias had a cut on his temple and snow packed along one sleeve. Rusk slid into the drift pocket, he said. Shoulder may be broken. Guards took him back. One of their horses went lame. And Lottie, pinned between two spruce below the notch, alive, angry enough to outlive us all. Maren looked past him. Benedict? Elias took the reins from the horse and hung them over a peg, walking down, alone, for now. You left him, I left him a trail. Elias looked at her, and the quiet between them changed. I could have done more up there, she understood. The rifle, the ledge, the storm. All the ways a mountain could become an answer no court would question. But that choice is not mine, he said. Maren's hand tightened on the colt. For 4 years every choice had been taken from her and then explained as protection. Now one of the most terrible choices in the world had been set carefully back into her hands. Bring him here, she said. Elias studied her face. I want him to hear me while he is still cold enough to know I am real. Elias nodded. Then he went back out. It took nearly an hour. Maren did not pace. Pacing was for people who believed motion changed waiting. She sat at the table with the colt 3 inches from her right hand, the paper scrap beside it, and the black ribbon tied under her glove. When the door opened, Benedict came through with his hands bound in front of him by rawhide. He looked less like a king than she had ever seen him. His good coat was torn at the hem. His boots were white with frozen snow. His face was red from cold and fury, but the fury had holes in it now. Cold had done what Grayfork never had. It had made him ordinary. He sat because Elias put a hand on his shoulder and the chair was there. Maren looked at him across the table. For a moment her body remembered him before her mind could correct it. The flinch started in her spine. She let it happen. Then she let it end. Who is Pruitt? She asked. Benedict breathed through his nose. You are confused. No. You have been frightened and influenced by a man who is Pruitt? His eyes moved to the colt, then to Elias, then back to her. Jonah Pruitt. What did he buy? Maren, what did he buy? The public voice cracked, not loudly, just enough. A transfer to Bitter Gulch. You don't know what you're talking about. She picked up the paper scrap and slid it toward him. Vale. His false name for her. His tidy little disappearance. Something shifted in his face, not guilt. Benedict had too much practice with language for guilt. It was irritation at evidence. Lottie made the introduction, Maren said. He said nothing. Say it. This is childish. She cocked the colt. Benedict stopped being cold. Fear warmed him all at once. Maren saw it enter his eyes, fast and human and naked. She had dreamed of that look. She had imagined it on nights when she lay beside him listening to him sleep, and wondered how a person could be so monstrous in daylight and so defenseless in the dark. Now that it was in front of her, she did not feel the joy she expected, only clarity. Lottie made the introduction, Benedict said. And you arranged to sell your wife under a false name. No one would have called it that. I am calling it that. His mouth tightened. The old Benedict came up for air. You can shoot me, and it changes nothing. Do you think a dead husband gives you freedom? Do you think law vanishes because you point a pistol? No. Then put it down. Maren held the gun steady. She thought of the study floor, the heating grate, the black ribbon, the way the women in the mercantile folded cloth instead of looking up. She thought of killing him and carrying that fact into every room she entered for the rest of her life. Not because he did not deserve punishment. He did, but because he had already taken enough rooms from her. He would not take the next one. She lowered the hammer, set the colt on the table. Benedict exhaled like a man who had mistaken mercy for weakness. Then she reached for his coat. "Stand up." He blinked. "What? Stand up." Elias stepped behind him. Benedict rose. Maren searched the inner breast pocket of his coat and found exactly what men like Benedict always carried close. A folded transfer note to Jonah Pruitt, a bank draft, and beneath them a deed release bearing her father's property description, prepared but unsigned. Maren stared at it, her father's land. The 20 acres Benedict had promised to protect, the land he had used as bait 4 years earlier. "You kept this," she said. Benedict's face closed too late. "It was not valid yet, but you prepared it, Maren." She set the deed release on the table, then the bank draft, then the transfer note. 3 pieces of paper, 3 corners of the cage. She fed the transfer note to the fire first, then the bank draft. Benedict lunged halfway out of the chair, and Elias put him back in it. "You stupid woman," Benedict hissed. "You think burning paper burns memory? No." She held the deed release over the flame. "This one I am not burning." She folded it and put it inside her coat. "You will sign it in Crowwater in front of a clerk who does not owe you money." "I will do no such thing." "You will if you want your horse returned." Benedict laughed once, harsh and unbelieving. Then he looked toward the peg by the door. His black gelding's bridle hung there. Elias had taken his horse, his guards were gone, his deputy was broken. Lottie was somewhere below the notch with snow in her skirts, and no one to command but the trees. Benedict looked back at Maren, and for the first time in 4 years he had no room large enough to stand in. She took his gloves from the table and tossed them into the fire. Not the coat, not the boots, just the gloves. Small things mattered to Benedict. Counting had taught him that. "When you walk back down," she said, "you will feel every finger." His eyes went flat. "This is not over." Stood. "No," she said. "It is over in the only place that mattered." She touched her own chest just once. "You may make noise in Grayfork. Lottie may build stories. Rusk may swear he was attacked by devils on the ridge. You may call me ungrateful, mad, stolen, ruined, whatever word makes weak men comfortable. But I will not be there to learn the sound of it." She opened the door. Cold filled the cabin. Benedict looked at Elias, then at Maren. He wanted to say something grand, something final. But the cold reached his bare hands and all grandeur left him. He walked. They watched from the doorway as he descended toward the trees, his hands bound in front of him, his fingers exposed to the kind of winter he had always watched through glass. Maren stood until the woods took him. Then she shut the door. Her knees shook after, not during after. She sat at the table, put both hands flat on the wood, and let her body tell the truth. Her voice had not. Elias sat across from her. He did not reach for her. He did not tell her she was safe. Safe was too large a word to spend carelessly. After a while she untied the black ribbon from under her glove. She held it over the fire, then stopped. "No," she said. She folded it and put it beside the deed release. Elias watched. A reminder, a boundary. The next morning they rode to Sentinel Notch after sunrise. Not because the trail was easy. It was not. Maren's ribs turned every incline into a negotiation. Her breath came short. More than once she had to stop with one hand on the saddle and pretend she was studying the view. Elias let her pretend. At the top, the world opened. Below them Grayfork was a dark stitch in a white valley. The Hale house was a pale mark on the ridge. The mine road curled like a black thread. Everything that had once seemed too large to escape looked small enough to cover with her thumb. Maren stood in the wind and held her father's compass. The glass was cracked. The needle still pointed north. "Crowwater is that way?" she asked. Elias pointed beyond the far slope. "Past the creek line, 2 days slow, 3 with rest. And after Crowwater, Idaho Road. Oregon beyond that, if you want timber and rain. If I want." He looked at her. "Those words belong to you now." The wind moved across the notch. Not cruelly, just present. Maren looked out over the ranges, the valleys, the long white distances that did not care whose name was on a freight contract. For the first time in 4 years, the world did not look empty. It looked unfinished. She did not feel healed. That would have been a lie. She would flinch at bootsteps for a long time. She would wake in strange rooms and need to locate every exit. She would hear Benedict's voice in ordinary questions and have to teach herself the difference. Freedom did not arrive like sunlight. It arrived like work, cold, exact, and waiting to be done. Elias stood beside her, quiet. She appreciated that more than any speech he could have made. After a while, she took the black ribbon from her pocket and tied it around the cracked compass. Not as Benedict's warning, as hers. A line she had crossed. A line no one else would move for her again. They left the cabin that afternoon. 2 horses, 1 rifle, 1 Colt, $76 between them. Because Elias put his own money on the table without calling it charity, and Maren accepted it without calling herself weak. At Crowwater, Benedict signed the deed release in front of a clerk who did not know his importance, and therefore was not properly impressed by it. That may have been the cruelest part for him. Not the cold, not the lost bank draft, not even Maren standing alive beside him. A clerk saying, "Sign here," the same way he would say it to any other man. Benedict signed. Maren took the paper. She did not thank him. 2 weeks later, she sold the 20 acres to a Swedish family with 6 children and a good wagon team, for less than Benedict would have claimed it was worth, and more than enough to keep riding west. By spring, she reached a valley in Oregon where rain came sideways, and trees grew so tall they seemed to hold up the weather. She found work keeping books for a timber mill, because numbers had never frightened her. Only men who used them as chains. The first night in her rented room, she set 3 things on the small wooden table: her father's cracked compass, the deed release, and the black ribbon. Then she put the Colt in the drawer. Not because she was done needing it, because it no longer needed to be the first thing her hand could find. Years later, people in Grayfork still told versions of the story. In some, she had been stolen by a ridgeman. In some, she had gone mad in the storm. In some, Benedict Hale had been betrayed by everyone but himself, which is the kind of story a man like Benedict can live inside, until the walls finally rot. Maren did not correct them. She had no interest in returning to a cage just to argue about its measurements. She kept the books clean. She bought land with rainwater on it. She learned to sleep through ordinary footsteps, and on hard nights, when old fear rose like weather from the wrong direction, she would take the cracked compass from the drawer and hold it in her palm until she remembered the ridge, the wind, and the town below her, small enough to cover with her thumb. She had not survived because a man saved her. She had survived because, one frozen night, she stopped asking whether the world beyond the door was safe. She opened it anyway, and once she crossed the frost line, no one ever owned the road behind her again.